Realtree's Midwest Whitetail is brought to you by Cabela's, Easton Arrows, Frigid Forage, Fuse, Grizzly Coolers, Hoyt, Hoyman Tree Saws, Muddy Outdoors, Nikon, Ozonics, Redneck Blinds, Rocket Broadheads, RTP Outdoors, Trophy Rock, Spot Hog Releases, Wilderness Athlete, Viking Solutions, and Realtree.
Welcome to Midwest Whitetail. As I mentioned last week, one of the most enjoyable things that we do each season is finding back the bucks that we passed up or that we knew about from the year before. It's fun to see how their behavior changes, how their antlers change, how their bodies change. Well, the buck I'm going to talk about this week is a deer that we knew about last year. He was an older deer, super fully mature 8-pointer, pretty decent overall buck. Probably a deer that we would have thought about shooting if he would have came within bow range. But this guy sort of slipped through the cracks. But we're going to pull him up and bring him to the top of the list for this year. And I'm going to call him the Old 8. But anyway, let's get back to a little bit more about where I'm at and maybe in relation to how we could hunt this deer. And behind me is one of my favorite stands on the whole farm. There's a ridge, secondary ridge that goes off into the timber behind me, and it's named Death Ridge. And this is a spot that we've had tremendous success on big deer from over the years. It started in 2008. Mike Sawyer shot a buck here that we nicknamed Stickers. See, 2009, I had some good encounters there and killed a buck that we had nicknamed Survivor. 2011 is when I killed the G5 buck from that stand and almost had the G4 buck within range, two great big giant deer. So we've got some really exciting hunts to fall back on, and Death Ridge might play a role in the hunt for this Old 8. And it's a really good morning stand because you can access it from the opposite direction where the deer are most likely to come from. You know, we're assuming that if this food plot ever grows, I put this thing in about 5 or 6 days ago and we haven't had rain since, unfortunately. But if it grows, this is probably where the deer are going to kind of mix around a little bit during the nighttime and last thing in the morning, and then drift their way back out into the bedding areas. And there's other spots around here. I mean, I killed the double G4 buck from a great big cottonwood tree on the end of this ridge. You know, potentially that could come back into play again. From the standpoint of just overall deer behavior, we have seen over the years that as they get older, they get easier to kill. And there's two reasons for that. Number one, they tend to be more daylight active. They seem to do that. The other thing they seem to do as they get older is their home ranges close down. And those two factors come together. When a deer becomes more localized and more daylight active, he becomes a whole lot easier to kill. So we'll see if that holds true with the Old 8. He's definitely going to be a fun one to hunt this season. And this spot right here where I'm standing is going to be where a lot of that takes place. I spend a lot of time in the Redneck Blinds, and the ones that I've used most often are the fiberglass models. Everybody knows about the fiberglass Redneck Blinds, but what a lot of people don't realize is that Redneck also makes these soft-sided blinds. So I'm going to talk about those a little bit today. So this one is the 6x6 ghillie, and the ghillie obviously has the ghillie material on it, which makes it a little bit more three-dimensional. And one thing we found with deer is the more you can make it look natural, the more effective the blind is in a short amount of time. So let's look at some of the features on here. All the zippers are two-way zippers. The windows are the same. I'm going to step around to the window. And once again, you've got a double zipper. So you can configure this window, but there's a screen that slides that you can see through, but obviously the deer can't see through that screen. The material is weather resistant. You could be out in a rainstorm and not expect to get drenched inside this blind. You know, it's not going to be as good that way as the fiberglass because obviously that's 100% waterproof, but this is going to keep you dry except in some pretty extreme conditions. It's a removable cover. that goes on the frame. So once you get the frame built, it takes about 45 minutes bolted together. Then the cover just slides right on and it velcros into place. Redneck also makes a platform designed for this blind. So you can put the platform out yourself, just buy the platform that the blind sits on. You can set it on the ground, and it also has the optional stand, which is the upright that the platform sits on. So one thing that we found with the fiberglass blinds on trailers is having that extra mobility is super important, because once the deer get used to the blind in the field, they don't really pay that much attention to exactly where it's at. So having some portability is nice. So the sled is kind of a cool option that way. We've definitely, like I said, benefited from having the fiberglass blinds on trailers. So let's go inside this blind and I'll show you a couple more of the features on the inside, and then I'll let you go to the redneckblinds.com website and check it out for yourself. So one of the features that I always liked so much about the fiberglass Redneck blinds was the fact that the windows were in the corners. So you had a lot of flexibility in how you set up and how you could get your shots, especially with a bow. And you've got, you know, a real handy mesh screen. I mean, I can look out of there and I can see, you know, right up until the end of legal shooting time, I can see what was coming out, but they can't see in because it's so darkened on the inside. So that just, you know, you can just move it out of the way ever so slightly and take your shot. So that's real handy. There's one on each of the 3 sides. This one has the console on it, which is optional. They bolt right into the blind. They're pretty handy for keeping your items, whether it be binoculars, or in my case, I've got a little bit of drink mix on there. You know, people will, you know, take advantage of that just as a storage place within the blind, keep things handy. Those are the main features in this blind. The main thing, of course, is it does all the stuff that the fiberglass blind does for a lot less money, except it isn't a 100% permanent blind. You do have to take the cover off during the off season in order to protect it, so you can, you know, get right back to action again in the fall. So next I'm going to pull out the camouflage version of this blind and we'll take a look at that real quick. The main difference on the camouflage blind compared to the ghillie is the outside of the blind. Obviously the inside is exactly the same. The camouflage version has these built-in straps that allow you to attach brush to it. Both the camouflage version and the ghillie version of the soft-sided blinds are great options for mobile hunting. They're easy to move and they give you a great advantage when you're hunting around food sources and anytime you want to do a better job of controlling your scent. In this last segment, I'm going to take you back to the 2 food plots that I worked on during the first episode and the second episode. The one I'm standing in right now is the one that we worked on during the first episode, which was the plow down clover converted into big and beastie. Whenever you till something, you run the risk that you have to have a really nice rain after that in order to get germination, to get things growing. And we caught about a 3-inch rain over a couple-day period after we tilled this up and broadcast the big and beastie on this plot. So it's doing really well. There's a fair amount of subsoil moisture down there still. I expect this to keep growing, you know, for a while. I mean, we're gonna need rain eventually, of course, but this one is gonna do well. And I can see it continuing to go for quite a while and filling in and getting real nice and lush. The big and beastie did well. Even the spots that look a little bit sparse, if you get close enough to them, you can see the small plants in there. They just didn't have quite as much moisture to germinate as early, and they just aren't, you know, as full and as big. So this one's a success. I'm excited about it. We can close the chapter on this one and come back during the hunting season, and we'll expect there to be some deer using this, and then hopefully we can get them within bow range of that redneck blind. Now I'm back on the food plot that I talked about on last week's episode, where I had brought the RTP Genesis no-till seeder and drilled the big and beastie into this plot. I came back the next day and sprayed it, and you can see that the kill is starting to take effect. So we've had about a week here, and the big and beastie is already coming out of the ground. We haven't had a single drop of rain since then. So this is the trade-off, and I talked about it a little bit last week too, but we started this episode up on a ridgetop on a food plot that I created roughly 6 days ago, more or less, and I tilled it up, broadcast the big and beastie on top of the ground, and, you know, incorporated the fertilizer. There's not a single plant even thinking about germinating there, because once you till it, then you have to have rain. in order to get germination, because now you've exposed all that soil to the air and it dries out, and then you don't have anything there for the seed to germinate. Whereas in this case, we came in here with the no-till drill, and we haven't using the existing subsoil moisture, and now we've got big and beastie coming up. We're going to need rain here too. I mean, it's not as if we're going to get by for the rest of the fall without rain, but there was enough subsoil moisture to get the seed to germinate and to get it growing. And some of them are pretty tall. I mean, I'm looking at one here that's probably 2 inches tall. So I'm overall very satisfied with the way this one's turned out. I'm feeling pretty good about 2 of the 3 plots. So that's it for this week's episode. I know of one more buck at least that I'm going to talk about next week. And I'm sure we'll have some updates from some of the rest of the teams, and hopefully you can join us then. We'll see you right back here again next week for the next episode of Midwest Whitetail. And remember to always dream big.